today's webinar, we will have our speakers discuss and help us understand how cost model and cost analysis acts as an enabler to support strategic procurement decisions. So before we move ahead with the presentation, I have some general set of instruction as always. Please note that all attendees will be placed on mute. During the course of the presentation, if you would like to post questions, you will find a box on the right-hand side panel, which is indicated in red in the slide that you see. I request you to type your questions and hit the send button. And as and when the presentation is in progress, I will note down the high-frequency questions and will post it to the presenter at the end of the session. If you're experiencing any connection issues, request you to close the window, go back to the email, and try to connect using the same link. If there are further problems, I kindly request you to quickly email Puneet at puneet.ramal@beroe-inc.com, which you also find in the email. So moving on, let me quickly introduce the speakers and our expert for today. Our speaker, Aditi Dev, is a cost modeling expert at Beroe. Her expertise in the field of cost modeling helps her address client-specific costing and procurement intelligence queries with respect to costing. She has built extensive knowledge and expertise in developing procurement insights based on cost models, which cut across various domains like pharma products, mining, chemicals, agro, and many more. She has written several thought leadership papers, to quote few, like Parametric Cost Modeling, Metamorphosis of Cost Models, which focus on future usage and development of cost models. To introduce our expert today, Dr. J.R. Murti. He holds a PhD from Indian Institute of Science and an MS from New York University and is a biotech entrepreneur. Currently in Bangalore, India, his biotech startup is focused on commercial bionutritionals, active biopharma ingredients, design green membrane, process technologies in health, wellness, biopharma, and bionutritional production processes. Over 3 decades, he has been a scientist, technologist, consultant, and administrator. By circumstance, he is mentoring pro bono 4 startups in his personal capacity. Thank you for joining us. Let me pass it on to the presenters and speakers of today's webinar.
Thank you, Sharon. Once again, I welcome you all for today's webinar. Procurement functions are no longer a across-the-table negotiations exercise, but rather there is a need for strategic decision-making to enable better cost savings. The game changer that will enable better decisions is adoption of cost modeling as an effective tool in negotiations, sourcing, and decision-making. Cost model is no longer just an accounting practice, but it is an enabler to be used in strategic decision-making. Today, we will understand how to discover such areas and use insights from various cases to address problems faced by the procurement community. To begin with, let me share something interesting. A Fortune 500 pharma company was able to generate savings up to 35% on their syringe procurement expenses. The total expenditure, which generally fell in the range of 130 to 150 million USD, was reduced by 35% after incorporating insights from a cost analysis activity. Yes, what you heard was right, 35% of their procurement expenses. Is it practically possible? The answer is yes. This can be achieved through implementation of insights provided by the cost models. The company roughly obtained a cost savings of 60 million USD for 100 million units of syringes that are sold in the market. Now, I'm sure that you would like to know if cost models could really help procurement to achieve such a humongous amount of savings. With that, let's move forward with the agenda for today's webinar. First, we will witness how cost model usage is shifting from being a traditional accounting exercise to broader aspects related to strategic procurement. Following this, we will try to understand why and when cost models are used. Next, we will try to understand the major procurement problems faced by procurement managers of Fortune 500 companies and how cost models can address such problems. Further, we will discuss the usage of cost models as a negotiation, supplier selection, and decision-making enabler with appropriate case examples of real-life case problems wherein cost model has been able to provide significant inputs. And finally, we will conclude our webinar. Let us now quickly understand the comparison between the typical usages of cost model versus best-in-class practice of cost models so as to highlight the significant shift of focus towards creating value. Cost models usually throw numbers explaining about the cost of production and related data. However, if the same cost model is used as a strategic enabler, then one would be able to visualize the steps of product optimization. This can include design changes, process changes, raw material substitution, and many others. Normally, a cost model would give us an idea about cost drivers. But from a strategic point of view, cost models help in terms of cost drivers as well as their variations for a considerable time. They can also indicate the forecasted impact of changes in cost drivers to the total cost of production. To explain my point, let us consider the niche market of sodium silicate in Egypt as an example. Soda ash is the major raw material for producing sodium silicate. Manufacturing of soda ash is an energy-intensive process. The price of electricity has increased 3 times in Egypt in the past 3 months, resulting in the simultaneous increase in the price of soda ash, which in turn has led to an increased cost of production for sodium silicate. A cost model in this case helps us to identify this connect and prepare procurement options such as hedging or inventory management. An important use of a cost model would be to assess the incumbent suppliers, whereas a strategic use will be to check the cost addition in each and every step of the supply chain. Apart from being a contract enabler based on raw material and machine supplying capabilities, cost models can also be used as a sourcing strategy enabler. For example, it can be used to identify the best cost country sourcing opportunities. Finally, a cost model explains the impact of increase in purchase volume and decrease in indirect costs per unit, whereas from a strategic perspective, its use will be to focus on collaboration with suppliers and fix on contracts based on designs and cost optimization. This point can be explained by illustrating how automobile manufacturers collaborate with their core suppliers, for example, engine makers. They fix design specifications for engines based on the raw material price impact, which in this case could be steel prices. This can also be termed as supplier partnership. So now, as we clearly saw how cost models could prove to be a strategic support enabler by just utilizing the same in the right way, it is now time for us to understand why and when a cost model can be utilized in a procurement life cycle. A couple of months back, we were talking to Matt, a purchasing manager, about his job. He explained that his main role is to evaluate suppliers, negotiate contracts, and review products. We understood the series of steps that he will carry out during the entire procurement lifecycle. And we tried to identify the areas where cost model can play a crucial role in the entire procurement lifecycle. The lifecycle begins with information gathering on the process used and the material used. Data related to these segments can be collected through supplier interaction. Supplier list is developed based on production requirements. Shortlisting of suppliers is done through supplier assessment surveys. Finally, supplier negotiation can be done based on should-cost models. Contract formulation can be done based on cost drivers and prices. Procurement lifecycle ends with contract expiry. Using interactive cost model, supplier or substitute product switching can be done. Hence, cost model can help in all stages except internal information gathering and process lifetime completion. The points that have been discussed shows the scope of the usage of cost models and the futuristic scenario of the same. We will discuss this further in the course of our presentation with various case examples. However, before doing so, it is important for us to understand the various problems faced by procurement managers today. I recently read an article on the website My Purchasing Center, where a procurement manager shared his thoughts on challenges faced by procurement community today. These challenges can be broadly categorized under three separate headings such as negotiations, supplier switching, and decision making. When it comes to negotiations, the important areas are cost breakup, cost drivers, profit margins, and negotiation levers. Under supplier switching, the major challenges faced are best cost country sourcing, cost benchmarking, integrated versus non-integrated supply chain issues. Finally, when it comes to decision making, the major problems faced are sustainability and last but not the least, buying decisions. Let's see if cost model can address such problems. Cost model has helped manage these procurement problems more effectively, and it has also achieved the desired results. This will also take into consideration futuristic capabilities and evolution of cost model. The evolution of cost model will include three basic steps. First, use of cost model as a negotiation enabler. Second, use of cost model as a supplier selection enabler. And finally, use of cost model as a decision-making enabler. To understand the benefits of cost model in addressing each of the problems identified, we will now discuss the same with the help of case examples. This will highlight how cost model plays the role of an effective tool in addressing the challenges. So let us consider cost model as a negotiation enabler. Well, there is no thought about how fundamental is negotiation in procurement, and cost model has an important relation to it. Let's figure out how. A Fortune 500 healthcare company was trying to negotiate with their incumbent suppliers, and they wanted to know whether the price quotes forwarded by their suppliers for syringes are in line with the industry in North America, LATAM, and APAC region. So for the cost model based approach, the first step that was considered was understanding the production process of syringe manufacturing. After that, cost comparison was done for China, Brazil, and US based on the cost models that were developed for these three regions. Finally, a suggestion was made to procure a 5 ml syringe from China. The process details were extracted by interaction with suppliers, and data related to supply chain, production process, etc. were collected, and countries in line with the requirements of the product were selected. In this case, the formulation, injection molding, and filling process was done by contract manufacturing organizations, which are otherwise called as CMOs. After developing the cost models for these three regions, the key insights that were worth noticing were formulation costs, injection molding, and filling costs in the US are 28%, 50%, and 90% higher than Brazil and China respectively. A lesser cost of production for a 5 ml syringe was observed compared to a 10 ml syringe and a 12 ml syringe. Well, here the key takeaway was a game changer because usually the dosage forms with higher volume can be manufactured by incurring low cost, but in this case it was not so. So let us see what are the reasons for a lesser cost of production. The reasons are, first, lesser raw material consumption. Second, increased throughput in molding and filling processes, which would mean that a conversion cost for a 5 ml syringe is lesser compared to a 10 ml and a 12 ml syringe. These two reasons bring down the cost of production to 6 to 7% lesser when compared to the cost of production of a 10 ml and a 12 ml dosage forms. China will be a better sourcing location compared to Brazil and US because of lower raw material costs, lower utility costs, and lower labor costs. Further, it was also seen that the Chinese CMOs achieved a profit margin of 30%. So, the company could negotiate based on higher margins that the supplier had. Now, wasn't that insightful? Based on these insights, the should-cost model was used to negotiate with the suppliers as the margins were the highest for China, and based on higher margins, negotiations can be initiated. Having seen this, let us now see how cost model can support in supplier selection. A company uses cost-based sourcing decision to decide whether to continue with the incumbent supplier or switch to an alternative supplier with the motive to lower purchase costs. So, let us move forward and see how cost model can be used as a supplier selection enabler. To bring forth this aspect, we'll now see how cost model can be used for best cost country sourcing through the following case study. A Fortune 500 mining company was sourcing activated carbon from Sri Lanka, and they were interested in knowing which country will be the best country to source activated carbon if they consider Sri Lanka, India, and Indonesia. The situation analysis is as follows. The first step included understanding the production process for manufacturing activated carbon, followed by developing the cost models for Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and India. Finally, there was this insight which was observed that there is a shift in sourcing from Sri Lanka to Indonesia. The cost models revealed that the cost of production for activated carbon in Sri Lanka was higher than that of India and Indonesia. Let us see why. The main cost driver were the prices of coconut shells in Sri Lanka. Due to bad harvest in Sri Lanka, the prices of coconut shells were high there. Again, due to urbanization, there was a scarcity in land availability for coconut production, and therefore sellers had also had to pay a tax of 11 Sri Lankan rupees to the government for per kg of coconut shells sold. Hence, these were the reasons that led to increase in raw material prices and finally a higher cost of production in Sri Lanka. Shifting options to Indonesia was inferred based on the cost model, and it was realized that the cost of production in Sri Lanka was 40% higher compared to Indonesia. Thus, the key takeaway that came out of this process was that Indonesia will be the best cost country to source activated carbon due to lesser raw material costs, lesser labor costs, and lesser utility costs. And a cost reduction of 50% can be achieved by implementing this insight. So moving on, let us now, through a case study, try to understand how cost analysis and cost models aid benchmarking activities in procurement. Cost benchmarking helps us to understand should cost based on the best practices for a particular region. So taking cost benchmarking into account, best sourcing options can be chosen based on various parameters. Let's see how. A Fortune 500 FMCG company was buying HDPE bottles from Mexico, Brazil, and China. They wanted to see if the supplier base can be consolidated and HDPE bottles can be sourced from one location. Here, the approach towards the problem based on cost model was understanding the production process for HDPE bottles, followed by developing cost models for these three regions. And finally, a suggestion was made to procure the product from Mexico due to existence of free trade in Mexico. So the key insights that were highlighted based on the cost models were: the cost of production for HDPE bottle in Brazil was highest due to higher resin prices and high utility and high labor costs. Lower utility and labor costs in Mexico made it a favorable option for sourcing, but resin prices were higher in Mexico because of a higher demand. No guesses for suggesting that China will be a low-cost country because of lower labor and resin costs. The game-changer viewpoint here was the fact that in Mexico a free trade agreement was allowed, and since the company was based out of US, sourcing to US from Mexico was easier and less costly compared to China with respect to transportation costs. Therefore, the output realized due to the cost model was Mexico is a favorable sourcing location, whereas Brazil and China can be eliminated. The myth that China always is the most favorable sourcing region was altered here through insights from the cost model outputs. Another case which is of interest when it comes to usage of cost models is supplier selection, where suppliers are selected based on their integration levels. Now, the general understanding regarding such a scenario is that integrated suppliers are preferred. This is absolutely true, but can we quantify this? Let us see. A Fortune 500 agro company could save more than USD 1 lakh on selecting an integrated supplier compared to a non-integrated supplier, where the raw materials are manufactured in-house and not bought from suppliers. The cost model-based approach here included understanding the production process of the supplier, analyzing the various factors that would change based on integration and non-integration, followed by choosing an integrated supplier in the US. So, the key insights that were observed through the cost model were the major raw material was corn in this case, which had a cost contribution of 46% in case of a non-integrated supplier, and the cost contribution in case of an integrated supplier was 31%. That was quite interesting. Not only did it seal the deal in terms of cost preference, this analysis also provided insights to the region of sourcing. As the major raw material is corn, it would be better to source from US, which has a good corn market, and it is closer to the usage region as compared to the import options, thereby providing a clear-cut quantification for the preferred strategy of local sourcing from integrated supplier option. This statement was quantified to the cost model because the cost of production of the fertilizer in China was 5,000 USD per ton, whereas in US the cost of production of the same fertilizer was 4,750 USD per ton. Thus, the final key takeaway was to source the fertilizer from US. The company did so and found that they were able to achieve a cost savings of more than 100,000 USD. It is clear from this case study that industry majors are noticing the benefits of cost analysis and usage not only for transactional procurement activities such as negotiations, but also in strategic activities such as supplier selection and procurement region preference. Having understood this, let us now dig deeper to find out how cost models can be utilized as decision-making enablers for procurement managers and how problems are alleviated by the usage of cost models. Cost information plays an important role in every organization in its contribution towards decision-making process. Its impact is to ensure control over operations, processes, etc. To achieve significant savings on procurement expenses, organizations compete on parameters like control on production costs, quality costs, and sourcing location costs. On the whole, this leads to achieving various goals such as sustainability and efficient procurement, as well as economies of scale. So moving ahead, we will be focusing on how a cost model enables decision-making in a procurement function with the help of some case examples. Here we have a case study where a Fortune 500 FMCG company wanted to include sustainability in its value chain by replacing PET bottle virgin grade with recycled grade for beverage industry in Brazil. But how to quantify such exact savings? The cost model approach started with understanding the production process for manufacturing of a PET bottle virgin grade as well as a PET bottle for recycled grade. Further, the factors were studied which changed the cost of production in these two cases. And finally, it was seen that recycled grade is costlier than virgin grade. But how? Let's see. Here we have the production procedure for PET bottles, virgin grade and recycled grade. A normal PET bottle is made from PET resin through extrusion and blow molding process. A recycled grade PET bottle starts with PET base, which undergoes repeated washing process, and then from PET bales we get PET resin, which is of recycled grade. This resin further goes the process of extrusion and blow molding, and finally PET bottle of recycled grade is produced. So let's see what are the key insights in this case. After the development of the cost model, it was found that the cost of production of recycled PET bottles were higher when compared to normal PET bottles. The reason being electricity cost. This cost was higher in case of recycled PET bottle by almost 30 to 40%, and higher consumption of electricity was due to repeated process of washing the resin to convert it into recycled resin. This resulted in the recycled resin made bottle being costlier by almost 10 to 15% than the normal virgin resin made bottle. Even after considering the cost involved, the company went ahead with recycled PET bottles. Why? That's because the company has added the cost benefits that can be accrued through higher carbon credits and subsidies, which made the per piece revenue accrued from recycled PET bottle higher than that of a normal PET bottle. Now that was insightful. Further, let us now see how cost models can not only help in known categories but in extremely niche categories and aid in the decision-making processes related to them. Here, we have a procurement problem wherein a Fortune 500 FMCG company was sourcing the components for falling film evaporator from UK, but they were struggling to find whether they can source from other regions as material and labor costs were quite high in UK. The cost model based approach in this case was first to understand the production process, the assembling part of the components, and the transportation process in case of a falling film evaporator. Then, it seemed choosing a Chinese assembler was a better option after the cost analysis. Finally, it was also seen that using flatbed containers and the option of transportation in an assembled form was a cheaper option and decreased the cost of production. On developing the cost model, the key insights that were captured are lesser raw material cost in China, which has led to a lower cost of production of falling film evaporator, thereby giving them a thumbs up in terms of lower cost of production. They also noticed that logistics and import duties contribute to 6% and 19% to the final cost of production of falling film evaporator. Having understood the importance of logistics cost through a cost model, they analyzed deeper to identify opportunities in transportation, and they finally developed a strategy which helped them to reduce the 6% and 19% accounted by logistics and import duties. So let's see what they finally opted for. They found out that if they are disassembling the parts and transporting them in normal containers, it would result in higher costs due to reassembly and low space utilization. To solve this problem, they adopted a strategy of assembling the final product in China itself and then transport the components in flatbed containers to achieve cost savings. So did you see how cost models illuminate the hidden costs which are generally overlooked in a sourcing strategy? So moving forward, we have Dr. J.R. Murti, who has joined us for this webinar. Dr. Murti, we have seen how cost models has impacted procurement decisions in the last 25 minutes of our discussion. So can you please give us an example where we can see the implication of cost model as a negotiation enabler, supplier selection enabler, and finally a decision-making enabler as a whole?
As Aditi mentioned, that the cost modeling as a very, very powerful and effective analytical tool, business tool, as well as a strategic tool, basically comes down on three tier functions. First one is that, yes, it allows you to negotiate. It allows you to identify the suppliers, including the flexibility of the suppliers. And finally, it allows you to make a very informed, rational, intelligent decision making. The idea of choosing the iPhone 6 was very straightforward. Well, in India, it's just been launched today. And the advantage is, that iPhone is there in almost every pocket that you can think of, and it's right there with you. Now, the question is that, how did Apple, which is based in California, and basically designed the entire iPhone as a productivity tool, as a business tool, how did it actually manage to put together such an amazing product that almost everybody aspires to it? Now, there is a very strong component over here, and it's based on Peter Drucker's famous insight that in any company, the real money comes in from innovation and from one side, and the other is in the marketing. Everything else in between is cost. So everybody definitely would like to see how we can rationalize the cost, how we can reduce the cost, and how we can make it more efficient. And this is where the cost modeling as an exercise, as well as the thing, helps you put everything in a very quantifiable, measurable, and tool. So as you can see that there are sites that actually tell you what is the cost of actually making an iPhone. You'll be absolutely surprised that when you dissect the iPhone, you can find out that it actually costs about $200 to make an iPhone 6. Ultimately, when it comes down to the consumer, all the way, a consumer is willing to pay $850. This we are talking about a straightforward, about 300% hold margin. How does Apple actually do that? Manage to do that? Well, Apple designs everything in California. The Apple suppliers' global locations include US, Mexico, Latin America, Israel, UK, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Russia, Australia, Czech Republic, Hungary, France, Italy, China. So what can be done is this, what Apple does is it negotiates. What does it do? It identifies that the major cost drivers for building an iPhone are memory, display, processor, camera, wireless section, user interface, sensor, battery, box contents, mechanical components. Well, using the cost models, it was found out actually, just about $4 would be incurred additionally per piece if the phones were to be assembled in the US. An additional labor cost of about $600 million would be incurred for reshoring iPhone back to the US in terms of manufacturing production. Moreover, Apple would have to pay 35% tax on profits if the iPhone were to be made in the US, versus just about 2% on the profit that it would earn from overseas operations. So you see, based on the overall cost analysis, or what you call as a tear-down analysis of manufacturing an iPhone, it is inferred that the manufacturing the iPhone in the US would cost them $4.2 billion. Yes, billion. Now consider that Apple will become vulnerable because the supply chain is so stretched out. You'll be surprised, for actually achieving lower costs, Apple went back to the APAC regions, Asia Pacific regions, China. Moreover, many of the suppliers are actually fabless. That means they had no company-owned fabrication facilities, and hence they outsource the fabrication. So the operations actually end up as made in China and Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, becoming the major suppliers. This is about the best example as you can get in the best cost country sourcing. Now, well, once all these things are actually put together, a decision has to be made. So the critical decision-making points which contributed to the production of the iPhones were first, the fingerprinting sensor design. It was actually developed in Florida, where whereas the manufacturing was done in Asia by the Taiwanese giant, that is TSMC. Second case in point, the M7 motion coprocessor. It was a brainchild of a company called NXP in Netherlands, but it was manufactured in Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Taiwan. So that gives you tremendous supplier switching, power. It also gives you a choice among suppliers. It can also shift suppliers from one source to the other in case there is any vulnerability detected in the supply chain. Moreover, there's 90% of the rare earth minerals that are used in circuitry, screen, glass, cover, they were all mined in China and Mongolia. So you see, these decisions were actually made on very, very short or low lead time, based on operational efficiency, based on flexibility in production. For example, one Foxconn factory can employ 230,000 assembly line workers, and each line can have about 72,000 iPhone backplates per day. In essence, once the backplate is put there, the iPhone production is done. They have multiple production lines, and China has hundreds of such factories. So you see, this is how a cost model of a product can be used in enhancing the value in procurement. Now, what is the strategic insight that actually comes down to this? To summarize, actually, from a very smart or an exclusive, bonded, long-term supplier relationships as a traditional model, Apple has actually used these kind of techniques to do first intelligent sourcing, command premium pricing, and finally do what is called as mind share dominance. That's the Apple way. Now, add in the way Apple has actually arranged for the pricing of the various levels inside the phones. For example, the storage levels, like iPhone 6 models come with 16 GB, 64 GB, 128 GB storage, instead of the usual 16, 32 GB, 64 GB of the prior models. Now, obviously, look at it from the consumer perspective, customer. Nobody is going to choose a 16 GB phone if they can help it. It's just way too small for an amount for a modern smartphone. So a lot of customers will pay an additional extra $100 for the higher range storage, adding a bunch more money to the Apple's margins. Oh, by the way, the second strategic insight, you see, this is how you capture the future using this cost modeling. If you know what the disaggregated components are required to manufacture an iPhone, like I said before, they are all there in China. 90% of the rare earth minerals used for the iPhone circuitry, they're all mined in China and in Inner Mongolia. So what happens is, if you know that you're going to command premium pricing, you are going to get an aspirational mindshare dominance, it makes sense to actually provide quality. And not only that, you control each and every aspect of negotiation, supplier chains, supplier selections, as well as you make decisions and also capture the future. This is one of the best lessons that you can ever learn in cost modeling. So I hope this was the summary that I could put forward to you. Over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Murti, for your thoughts on this topic. Finally, I would like to conclude by saying that cost models have not only emerged as effective tools in transactional procurement activities, but they have also shown much mettle in aiding various issues of the supply chain management. Today, during the course of our webinar, we discuss the following topics like typical practice versus best-in-class practice. We discuss scenarios of cost models in procurement life cycles, problems faced by procurement managers today. Then we discuss success stories of companies that have used cost models for negotiations, followed by cost models for supplier selection and cost models finally for decision making. The effective utilization of cost models not only helps to numerically analyze various problem areas, but also provides a tangible output in terms of quantifiable data, which when utilized correctly will provide the right information and knowledge. Cost model usage and related analysis still have a long way to go in terms of usage, but the future is not far away where it will be an integral part of any strategic procurement decision-making process. I can confidently say that I'm going to be a part of that future. Are you ready too?
Thank you, Aditi, and thank you, Dr. Murti, for your insights and the inputs that you had provided in addition to what Aditi was discussing. That was very insightful. This comes to the end of our presentation for today's webinar. However, we have a question from our audience regarding one of the aspects of cost model that was discussed in today's presentation. So the question is, what's going to be the impact of cost model when it comes to new product development? Aditi, what's your thoughts on that, please?
To start with, we can consider cost models for new product development. The first thing will be to fix on designs, see various raw material substitution, etc. to finally bring down the cost. We can then fix on optimum capacity and check how optimum operational margins can change the cost of production. We can also decide on the capital investment that can be fixed on machinery production lines and add installation charges to that and further add land and building charges, etc. and derive the final capital investment. Depreciation will be fixed on capital investment, and fixed cost will also include selling, general and administrative expenses as well as other expenses like distribution, R&D, etc. However, we can also go for a capital budgeting and consider the net present value for the project. Anywhere, if we get a net present value of greater than 0, depending on the cash flows, we can go ahead with the project. As a classical example, I would like to cite about a case study in India, which is of the nano car, because Tata Motors developed a car under the budget of $2,500. What they did here was that they collaborated with their core suppliers and designed parts of the car so that the cost of production per unit is in line with the target budget. Again, this also helped Tata Motors to maintain strong supplier relationship. So hence we can see how we start with a cost model development for a new product development and finally see the impact of cost model in strategic decision making and supplier relationship management. I think that would answer the question that Sharan had put forth.
Thank you, Aditi. I think this also answered another question that came from our audience. Meanwhile, you were just explaining that. Thank you so much for that. And we'll also try to add more detailed case studies which we have. We will send it to you via email, and we will ensure to answer it more in detail. So this brings to the end of today's webinar as we were running close to the closure time. Thank you all for joining us today. Sorry for the inconvenience. We had some technical glitches in between. Apologies for the same. Thanks, Dr. Murti. Your insights were valuable, and thanks for joining us today. Thank you one and all, and have a good day. Bye for now.